Welcome back to Pixel Project Radio, the video game discussions podcast where we do deep dives and analyze all of our favorite games and some of yours too. My name is Rick, and we are continuing October's theme of scary games, horror games, with Silent Hill 2, a landmark of psychological horror. As always, I want to thank the patrons of Pixel Project Radio, because without them, this show would not be possible. So major thank you to the patrons. If you want to be like them, you can check out www.patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. I don't think we need to add the www anymore. I think that's pretty apparent. I am joined by returning guest and horror gaming aficionado, Dustin Miller. Dustin joined us on the Resident Evil 7 podcast, which was my first Resident Evil game, and he's back with another landmark horror title. Dustin, how's it going, man?
Not too bad, man. Thanks for having me. I was here, it was last October. You know, I only come around for the horror games.
It's true. It's your specialty.
I like to think. I don't know if I go as far as saying aficionado. That's quite a compliment, but I like to play them.
Yeah, listeners, if you haven't checked out that Resident Evil podcast episode, please do so. It was last October. That was my first Resident Evil game. I haven't played another one since. We were actually a peek behind the curtain. We were going to do, I think, Resident Evil 1 for this month, but when Dustin and I were talking, I mentioned that I was interested in doing Silent Hill 2 because I had never played it before, and I knew that we were doing Silent Hill 1, and he was like, yeah, let's do that. So that's why we're here. And I'm glad that we decided that, because I can just say this up top, I love this game. This was an incredible experience.
Yeah, this game is it's top notch. Not to spoil anything for you guys, but especially with that remake coming out, that should be a day one buy for everybody.
It's definitely going to be for me. I can say that for sure. Let's talk about personal histories a little bit and go through some of our opening conversations. When did you first play this game?
So my first time playing this game, so this was only my second playthrough ever of this game. And the first playthrough would have been, early 2000s, right? We would have been in like middle school, maybe the beginning of high school. Before I could really understand what I was playing. It was still a really cool game then. But man, playing it now when I can really dive in and kind of understand the message behind everything is a whole different experience. So I liked the game then, but man, I love it now.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think a lot would be missed if you play this game as a younger person and don't pick up on some of these themes of psychology and stuff like that. This game was a pioneer, one of the major pioneers in psychological horror. Silent Hill 1 was as well. If you're listening to this, check out our Silent Hill 1 episode. It just released previous to this. And we talk a lot about this series' influence on horror gaming in that episode. So we're probably not going to talk about that as much here. When you played it this time, Dustin, you said that you had played this on PC, right?
I did, yeah. I played, so there is a fan-made enhanced edition for this game. You install the base game, and then you install the enhanced edition that fix a lot of the things that didn't port well to PC. So it fixes a lot of textures and things like that. So I played the fan-made enhanced edition on PC.
Very nice, very nice. I didn't play it on PC. I thought about it, but I ended up playing this on PS2. I have the game physically. I played it on my CRT monitor, which more and more is just becoming my preferred way to play any of these retro games.
Yeah, man, I have to say I'm jealous of your setup there. That's super cool to just experience it that way.
Yeah, it's really cool. And, I've got two CRTs right now, and I think they cost me like $10 each. A lot of people just want to get rid of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it takes up a lot of space. And if you're not using it for something like, retro gaming, I mean, there's not really a use for it anymore. So
this game does look good if you just emulate it straight up. It looks even better with shaders, and it looks terrific on a CRT. That was the main reason that I wanted to do it that way rather than emulating it on my Legion Go, was just to have that CRT filter experience, and to, sit down in front of a TV like when we were kids. Made it all the better.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted that same experience, right? There's nothing better than playing one of these horror games, in the dark in your living room under a blanket. So I moved my entire PC to the living room and hooked it up to the TV that way because I wanted that same experience. So
Yeah, and speaking of that horror game experience, this is something we talked a little bit about on the Resident Evil episode. You play a lot more horror games than I do. I don't play as many, but how does this compare to other horror games to you? This is obviously Silent Hill 2 is known as being one of the most important horror games ever. Most sites, if you are just looking around for lists of the greatest horror games of all time, Silent Hill 2 is going to be up there. But for you, how do you think this holds up, especially to like Resident Evil, which is the series that it's most easily compared to, right? I mean, especially because it was such a competitor back in the day. How does this stack up to some of those other horror titles for you?
for me, I am a big fan of just scary games, scary anything, horror movies, slasher movies, psychological thrillers. What I really like about this game is they didn't resort to the jump scare. They didn't resort to, a serial killer or anything like that. I think it was probably the first game that really took a chance on doing something like this and really diving into the psychological elements and kind of the horrors within your own mind, right? Rather than being chased by a killer or zombies or something like that. And I think that's why it stands up so incredibly well. Really took some leaps that to my knowledge, no other games were taking, or at least not to this degree and on this level. So, like I said, when I played it before, I enjoyed it, but it definitely didn't hit me the way it hit me this time. And now that I've had a chance to play it as an adult and, that has some life experiences under my belt, man, it's a heavy game. Even if there wasn't a remake coming out, I would recommend this to everybody just to experience this type of game. I think it holds up incredibly well, and it ranks pretty highly in the horror game realm for me.
Yeah, I agree. Something that we talked about in the last episode on Silent Hill 1 was this idea within the horror genre, there's tension and release, right? And a lot of psychological horror, and this is what Silent Hill is doing as well, is a continuing ramping up of tension and letting it sit, and occasionally you'll get some release, but it's never just tension and release going back and forth like a seesaw. It's not an equally swinging pendulum. It's a constant build of tension, and occasionally you'll get some release, but then the tension is just mounting up again. And that's what this game does so well. I think about other games, horror games that I really like Resident Evil 7. I mean, that's a great example because we were both talking about that one before. That's an anomaly in Resident Evil because that series largely is more action focused and there's more jump scares. I mean, there's that very famous one in Resident Evil 1 that it gets everybody every time, it seems like, the dogs. 7 certainly has jump scares, but it's much more unsettling, and it's a building of psychological dread. And that's what Silent Hill does extremely well. I'm with you. I like that they don't resort to jump scares. I often, that's a fine tactic to have, but using them too much feels very kitschy and cheap. Just doesn't add to the experience. Whereas this, you're going to be sitting in the feeling of dread, and you're something that I like. I saw this quote, and I don't remember who said it, but I do remember the person saying it was quoting someone else, and they couldn't remember who said it. So the source is lost to time, I guess. But they were talking about what makes good horror, and they said something along the lines of, in a movie, if there's a can of worms, people want to know why it's there. They want to know the reason that it's there. And horror, good horror, doesn't tell you. It lets you wonder yourself, and it lets you create the scares. Right? So that absence of reason, that absence of everything slotting nicely and rationally into things lets the mind wander. And, just like in Darkness, the idea that anything is possible is terrifying. And these games, Silent Hill especially, do that so well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. I think that perfectly, sums it up. And, I love Resident Evil, right? I'm not saying anything negative about Resident Evil. But the scare there is, Resident Evil 3, the scare is Nemesis chasing you the entire game, it feels like. It's just a different type of game, and I love it, and I love jump scares, and I love that type of game. But Also really love these ones that aren't afraid to jump into your psyche a little bit.
So if you are unfamiliar with Silent Hill 2, let's talk about the basic premise. This is not a game where you have to play the first one to understand it. It is a complete standalone title. If you do know the background of Silent Hill, specifically the origins in Silent Hill 1, you can have a somewhat enhanced experience here. It's not absolutely pertinent that you know that, though, going in. This can be a totally standalone title. But they do use the same setting, the same town of Silent Hill, and in one of the endings in particular, there is a callback to the first one. Before we dive into some precursory information, if you're new to the channel, if you're new to the show, first of all, welcome. Thank you for listening. The way that we structure this is we talk broadly up front about the game. We'll talk about the development, some of our overall thoughts about music, presentation, mechanics, things like that. And once we get into the story, we won't spoil anything before we actually get there. So we won't spoil the ending until we get to the scenes that explain it in the game. So if you're playing along, you can do so without fear of spoilers. I wanted to say that up front for this game especially, because a lot of the conversation is going to have to hold off until we get through a lot of the story. This is, I wouldn't want this game spoiled for anybody because it does such a great job of all of the foreshadowing and the symbolism before you get to the big reveal at the end. So, no spoilers until we get there. Do not be afraid to listen, and do not be afraid to jump out if you're approaching a part of the game that you haven't got to. So, that being said, let's talk about some basic information. And I want to start by reading a piece of correspondence from the community forum. If you do not know, the community forum is a special channel in our Discord server, which you should join, by the way. It is a free server. You can find an invite link in the description. In the community forum channel, you can give your thoughts about the games that we cover on the show, and I will read them. You write it, I'll read it. That's the tagline. Do with that what you will. And the first piece of correspondence comes from Dave Jackson. Here's what Dave has to say. Silent Hill 2 was instrumental in helping me get into horror games. Its focus on storytelling and exploration of themes through character interactions, enemy designs, and atmospheric horror rather than jump scares and mechanical pressure spoke to me. I still consider character-based psychological horror my favorite type of horror. Also, shout out to the music and sound design. It adds so much in this game and series. Yeah, that's echoing a lot of what we just said, so heartily agree. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, nailed it, Dave.
Good job, Dave. This game was developed largely in the same way as the first one. It was developed by Team Silent, published by Konami. The director is Masashi Tsuboyama. The art designer is Masahiro Ito. Writing credit, Hiroyuki Owaku. Composer, Akira Yamaoka. And the story was conceived by the CGI director, actually, Takayoshi Sato, who was also credited with the writing. You can find more of the credits on the IMDb and the wiki, or by beating the game yourself, but there's the basics. This game was released in September 2001 on the PS2. This development began essentially right after Silent Hill 1 finished in June of 99. I was reading about this, and if you're wondering whether Silent Hill 1's success was a factor in this, yes, it was. This was, I mean, there was an artistic desire to create something new with Silent Hill 2, but because they had a lot of constraints and limitations with the PS1, but money was a large driving factor for this one. Now, something that I found interesting here, Dustin, and I don't know if you knew this, was that the development team here was largely, I mean, they did look into other video games like Tomb Raider to see how 3D environments were really handled by teams that knew what they were doing at a high level. But largely, this team was inspired by non-gaming pieces of media. Things like Jacob's Ladder, the movie, Blue Velvet, the movie, Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, the artist Francis Bacon, and Junji Ito, to just name a few. And I found this really great quote from Sato. And here's what he said. Most people working for game companies are game freaks, but the Silent Hill team are artists and programmers first, mainly artists. Silent Hill 2 is not a typical game because most of our staff did not grow up playing games. Because of this, we hope to provide the gamer with a different sort of game. So, are you surprised to hear this sentiment from Sato regarding this game?
I had not heard that before, and kind of you read the quote to me, and I think back to the game, and no, I'm not surprised at all. I think you can kind of see those elements coming through in a lot of different ways in the game, and once you know about them. I mean, that's super cool. I'm surprised to hear it, but also not surprised. I think it is evident in some places in the game.
It's even evident in how the game plays, too. I mean, this game isn't going to win any awards for its gameplay, right? It's a little, what's the best way to put this? It shows its age, I think, the most with how the game feels in the hands. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I don't know if it's in the original or not, or if this is part of the enhanced edition. But did you have the option to change kind of your control scheme from like a 2D to a 3D scheme?
I was going to bring that up when we get there, but yes, I about 3/4 of the way through the game, I just went into the menu just to check stuff out, and I saw that, and I turned it off, and tank controls were gone, and I was like, oh, this is terrific. This is just great.
Yeah, I found out about halfway through as well, and I still don't know which one I liked better, but you're absolutely right. It's definitely not winning any awards for the game, the control elements of the game itself.
As far as tank controls go, though, it did feel, I don't know, maybe this is just because I was coming to this straight off of Silent Hill 1, but not using tank controls did feel kind of wrong in this setting. I don't know, like tank controls, I don't like tank controls, and they kind of frustrate me, but having that frustration with the controller and having to really plan my movements, I think that added, in its own strange way, it added to some of the tension that I was experiencing through these encounters.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly made them more difficult when I couldn't get out of a corner because I had to stop moving to spin, the proper direction first. And it took me way too long to realize you could strafe. I don't know when you realized you could strafe, but that was a good moment once I realized that.
Yeah, that's crucial too in some of these later encounters. I don't have a lot else in terms of development that I really wanted to touch on, but there are some things to talk about regarding the monster designs. Masahiro Ito was the designer, and he designed the monsters in Silent Hill 2 with this theme of soured flesh, and he wanted them to incorporate an element of humanity. That's about all we can say about the monsters before we get into spoiler section territory. There is more to talk about these designs. Just know that we can't right now because I don't want to spoil a single thing about this game because I think it's so darn good. So that being said, let's move into the visual presentation. And we've got a piece of correspondence here from Discord regular Poppy the Keaton. Here's what he has to say. At the time I played this, I was in the sweet spot of teenage immaturity, too young to grasp the context of the relationship, too cool to simply accept the emotions at face value. So I enjoyed the game because I wanted to know more about Silent Hill, and Pyramid Head was neat. This was also the first game where I went to the internet to figure out what to do next.
Yeah, I would say that Keaton and I probably played this around the same time. I enjoyed the game because I liked the town of Silent Hill. I thought Pyramid Head was cool. It was a fun game, but yeah, it was definitely too immature to really grasp, grasp the emotions and the psychological elements of the game. So definitely I was in the same boat.
Yeah, I can see a lot of the visual designs really appealing to somebody that's maybe a little young for the themes of this game. The visual design, I mean, a lot of it is pretty similar to Silent Hill 1. The fog looks significantly better in this game. Did you play Silent Hill 1, Dustin?
I've played Silent Hill 1. I have not completed Silent Hill 1.
Okay. But yeah, I'm sure you could agree too. The fog here, maybe it's just a result of the PS2 being more powerful, but it looks much, much better. It really looks like things are coming out of the fog. I think once you learn in Silent Hill 1 that it was used as a way to mask loading, you can kind of see it just in the way things emerge out of it. It's much more seamless in Silent Hill 2, the way things emerge out of the fog. It's not perfect, but it looks much more natural.
And that was one of the big issues with the game when they did do a PC port. The fog, it was so much less dense that it was practically non-existent. So you were able to see really low resolution textures and distant objects that you weren't supposed to be able to see. That really took a lot away from the game. So that's why you had fans create the enhanced edition, to patch some of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, that's such a crucial element that, if you get it wrong, it really takes away from the game.
Yeah, I agree. The non-patched version and the HD collection, I forget which game that's in. I think it's Silent Hill 2 and 3 are bundled in like an HD collection. Maybe it's Homecoming. I'm not 100% sure. But that version of this game of Silent Hill 2 is particularly hated by fans in no small part because of how it looks. It looks really, really bad. The fog looks... it just looks like chunks of white just sort of hanging out. No attempt to blend in. They're just there. It doesn't look good. So if you're playing this game, the PC enhanced version, like Dustin had played, or if you can find it, the PS2 version, that is the way to go.
And the enhanced edition is free. If you have the game installed, you can just download the enhanced edition for free and install that. So definitely recommend that if you're on PC.
Hey, there you go. In terms of visual design, this is returning to something that they did in Silent Hill 1, where there is a sort of parallel world going on. There's the standard world that you're in, and there is an other world. Sometimes it's called Otherworld, sometimes it's called Nightmare World. I've seen both, but the game will go back and forth between them depending on story events, and even the regular world looks pretty scary. I mean, things are deserted, buildings are kind of decrepit, but the Nightmare World, or the alternate world, Otherworld, really amps up to be exactly what you would expect in a horror game. Things are rusted, there are, biohazards and corpses everywhere, plants that look like they're growing from hell. It's a very hellish landscape, and just like in the first one, I think it looks terrific.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, obviously we'll get into the specifics, but the timing of the change between the two elements is really symbolic of a lot of different things. And I think that they absolutely nail kind of the contrast, right, between the visual presentation of both worlds.
Yeah, I agree. The character models look a lot better in this one as well. The upgrade from Silent Hill 1 to Silent Hill 2 is pretty significant graphically. I don't really have much more to say on it other than that. It's a significantly better looking game. So let's talk mechanics for just a second. This is largely going to be the same as in Silent Hill 1. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, again, check it out. Silent Hill 2 is essentially plays the exact same way. You're going to have tank controls. Combat is going to be done by holding one of the shoulder buttons, R2 usually, and pressing a face button. You're going to swing your big melee weapons or shoot your guns, depending on which you choose to use. You've got the same exact health system. It doesn't really give you a health bar, but you have to sort of discern your status by the color of the tint of your window in the menu and how much static is present. There is one new mechanic that is in this one. I'm pretty sure this wasn't in the first one. You can combine menu items, which is critical for some of the puzzles that you need to solve.
It's a very frustrating element, too, if you don't know how to combine them. I don't know if you ran into this, but it's not very intuitive how you combine them.
Yeah, there was one in particular that I don't think I would have figured out on my own. Like, I had to use a guide for it. That's kind of going back to what Keaton said. I think it's a very cool concept, right? I think it's unique, and I think it is creative, but some of them were a little confusing to me. One thing that I guess is kind of nice is if you have a door that requires multiple keys, you can just choose to combine them and it will sort of use all of them at once. So that prevents some of the in and out of the menu thing. I thought that was kind of neat.
That's nice. Little time saver.
Yeah, just a little bit. Otherwise, this is going to play identically to Silent Hill 1. The combat in Silent Hill games, I don't really think shines very much. In some of the, we'll talk about them whenever we get to some of these boss fights, but I felt like some of the boss fights were really had their impact diminished based solely on how the combat feels.
Yeah, I think that's one of the ways that this game shows its age more than anything else. The combat system is weak. The good news is it's a game that doesn't depend on it, right? It's a survival game. You can, obviously not the boss fights, but you can go through a lot of the game without combat, and that's, perfectly fine. And you don't really need to depend on combat. If this were a game where, super combat heavy and it had this combat, I don't know if I would have finished it, to be honest. I agree that that is definitely one of the weaknesses of this game.
It's one of the weaknesses, but like you said, it doesn't, ultimately it doesn't detract from the experience. That's something I think if you're more of a fan of the action elements of horror, something like Resident Evil might be more your speed. But, and I'm not trying to excuse it like, well, it doesn't matter if the combat is bad because it's not trying to be good. I mean, I kind of, there's part of me that does feel that way, but, it doesn't mean that you can't talk about it. And the combat, it's a little tedious. I never really felt much joy in fighting things. More often than not, I was running away from things because it made everything feel a little bit scarier.
Yeah, and I think there's some level of intention behind that. I don't want to feel like I can just run in and kill everything because it's a survival game. I do hate though that I have to hit them with my lead pipe 4 times and then when they're laying on the ground, kick them, because if I don't kick them, they'll get back up and attack me again. Seems a little silly, but combat is so far behind all the other, mechanics in the game that while it is a weakness, it doesn't take much away to me because you really don't need it, other than the boss fights, of course. But
and even some of the boss fights, you don't have to technically fight.
Right. Yep.
Which is, I thought that was cool. Another thing about the mechanics too is that the pace of the game is quite slow. So the tension of being around these monsters doesn't necessarily come from their speed. There's like one monster that's particularly fast. I guess 2. There's this monster I think it's called a Mandarin. It's sort of like a hellish monkey that hangs from sewer grates kind of thing, like that sort of floor, the grated floor, and like reaches up at you. Those move pretty quick. And then there's another monster that if you knock it down and you don't stomp on it, like you were just saying, Dustin, they start to crawl around extremely quickly. Other than that, all of these monsters are pretty slow. So the tension isn't coming from how quickly the monsters are able to get you. It's just, again, it's going back to that idea of slowly building tension and dread across a larger length of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And one element, that is also building is kind of the sense of claustrophobia, because you're slowly getting into more confined space with these creatures. And so it's, a lot of that fear is coming from, I'm immersed, I'm in this really tight hallway, and I know that there's a mannequin on both sides of me, and I have to figure out how to get around them. So it's not necessarily they're sprinting at me and I need to run. It's just I'm in this confined space with these things that are probably going to kill me.
And I think that's an area where tank controls can be very appropriate and make things feel a little bit more tense, right? Because you don't have the 3D stick control that you would in like a 3D action game of today. You have to turn and then run. You can't really do both very well at the same time.
Yeah, I agree, and I do think that it adds to the immersion a little bit. Where it's almost, if you look at what I'm actually doing, I'm just turning, right? But there's kind of I'm making a decision right now. I'm pausing because I'm trying to decide which way to run. There's I don't know. There's a kind of an immersion that comes with it to me.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. That's something that I lost a little bit whenever I turned on the 2D controls. They also, I can't put my finger on why, which isn't a good quality to have, not being able to articulate things whenever you're doing a podcast. But I can't put my finger on why, but the 2D controls don't feel great to me. Like I didn't feel like I had true control. Did you feel the same thing?
I switched it mid boss fight.
Oh God.
Halfway through the game, realized how much I disliked it and quickly changed it back. So I didn't give it a real attempt. But the brief time that I used it, it wasn't for me. I can tell you that.
Yeah. I don't know. I only played the last like fourth of the game in 2D mode. I think, I mean, I know I said that I was pleased to find that out, but I think overall, just looking back on the experience, I probably prefer tank controls, which is weird to say because I don't like tank controls, but at least it's better than like Dino Crisis. That being my first game for tank controls really soured my perception of them, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if I would have realized early in the game, that you could switch, I may have tried it. But I think, like you said, tank controls kind of work in this game. Typically, I agree. I'm not a big fan of tank controls, but I think they work well in this game.
Let's talk a little bit about music and sound. So this is the same composer returning, Yamaoka, from Silent Hill 1, and as such, I know I keep saying see the last episode, see the Silent Hill 1 episode. It's not because I don't want to talk about this stuff, it's just because a lot of what I'm going to say I also said there. So I'm going to kick it to you first here, Dustin. What did you think about the music and sound of Silent Hill 2?
I think they nailed it. I mean, I think that's one of the strongest elements of this game. The game is great from a story standpoint as well, but the sound adds so much, from little things like the static, from the radio whenever you're approaching a monster to, just this unsettling sound you hear around you. The music, changes from kind of, these harsh industrial type music to soft piano, depending on what's going on. And it just, you get this sense of sadness from the music, you get this intense music, you get, these really, really great sounds, depending on your environment. It's just, I think that's one of the strongest elements of this game. And if you really want to talk about immersion, that's where the immersion comes from, is the sound.
Yeah, let's, let me respond to the radio thing. There's something I want to say about the radio that's in relation to the story that I can't talk about it because it would be a spoiler. So just know, folks listening, stay tuned. This is going to be a largely back-heavy episode where we do more with the story than usual. Or I should say the balance is going to be heavier in that direction than usual. I think there's a diegetic reason why radio static makes sense. That wasn't, whether or not it was intentional, I don't know. What I do know is they brought it back from Silent Hill 1. This is the same mechanic from there. Whenever you're nearing a monster, a ghoul, a demon, the radio static is going to get very, very loud. And that's your tell, right? That's your tell that you're in danger. And sometimes it's necessary because you're not always going to have the best camera control. You can't just use the right stick to control the camera. So, and, sometimes you just straight up can't see because it's too dark. So having that as a little failsafe is really nice and very creepy. There is, if you pause the game while it's going on, it's going to continue the radio static, and it's just not a pleasant sound. It's very dissonant, and it's very, I think, I don't have any scientific thing to back this up, but it's just so very triggering emotions in humans that I think makes us want to get away from that situation, turning it off, running away, things like that.
Yeah, it creates such a sense of paranoia. I mean, there are times when you get into some of the later parts of the game where I did turn the radio off, but when you're, walking around Silent Hill, which we will get to, man, the sense of paranoia that creates is just so cool.
Paranoia is a great word for it. I personally, I can't imagine turning the radio off for this game. I mean, I can see why somebody might want to. It's just having that, I mean, I don't want to say annoyance, but having that intentionally distressing sound just adds so much to it to me. Like, I think, the challenge that you get with turning it off is you never know if you're safe or not. And that breeds its own tension and anxiety, just in a different flavor, I suppose. But I don't know. I feel like I would miss it.
Yeah, I mean, there were some parts later in the game, and we can address them when we get there, but where you're moving through the same areas repeatedly. So it kind of knew where everything was, all the monsters were. So the radio was not necessary at that point. So shut it off for times like that. But having it shut off, it does create its own, a different type of paranoia.
You had also mentioned the music too. I agree. Yamaoka's soundtrack is iconic. It is very much in the same style as 1. You had mentioned there are softer piano sections, some like mild, rock is, I don't know if that's really the word, but it's sort of a very mild instrumental rock that happens. You get through some of that. And, some of the ending themes too are a little more distorted and gritty. The real draw of this soundtrack is how industrial and cacophonous the music around Silent Hill is. Yamaoka, as a composer, I saw this quote where he said he doesn't consider the melody to be the most important element of a musical piece. And that tracks here. You're not going to find... There certainly are hummable melodies here, like actual character themes, but the music when you're around Silent Hill and around these set pieces, it's going to be very industrial. You're going to hear banging and clanging of percussion and instruments that maybe are being played in an incorrect way. The example I gave in the Silent Hill 1 episode is like a prepared piano, right, where you place like coins underneath of the strings, and the result is it still sounds pitch, but you get this harsh metallic timbre, and you get an extra oomph of percussive striking with the strings. You're going to hear a lot of that kind of music here. I've also heard 9 Inch Nails. Like, people will say, oh yeah, this is like a 9 Inch Nails soundtrack. Sure, I don't really listen to them all that much, so I don't know if that's an apt comparison. But it's definitely industrial, I think, is a great way to describe it.
You're not going to walk away with, a melody that you're going to be humming to yourself after playing this game. Character themes are one thing. Those are good. They're great. But for the most part, it's really, it's the use of, just sounds and just different instruments. And you nailed it.
I'll put up a little dichotomy here, a comparison of one of the character themes contrasted by some of the music that you might experience when you're walking around. It's good stuff. It adds so much to the experience. I am a huge fan of it. Yamaoka, I can't imagine another composer doing as good of a job as he does. The voice acting, I feel like, is something we should probably mention too, especially in comparison to Silent Hill 1. It's much better. It's not like... Okay, so Silent Hill 1's voice acting is... It very much reminds me of a B-plus horror movie where it's, it's not good, but you can kind of laugh with it. This, I think some folks could maybe argue that the voice acting here is a little weird, but I think it's done intentionally. And this is something I'm going to bring up later on when it's more pertinent to talk about. But I think the voice acting is done purposefully to make this whole experience feel like a dream. People, and also there are diegetic reasons why people talk the way they do to other characters, which, again, spoilers, we can't talk about that just yet. But the way people speak here is very deliberate, and sometimes it can be a little jarring.
Yeah, and I think a little bit. Sometimes it's a little bit. I don't know, exaggerated, and maybe that's not the right word. But I think the weakest voice acting was actually James, which is a little surprising for your main character to be your weakest. But I do think it is intentional to some degree, and for all the reasons that we'll talk about later. But yeah, I do think there's a level of intentionality behind it.
That's actually one of the things that I'm most curious about in the remake is what they're going to do with the voice acting. I wonder, I have a lot of faith in Bloober Team. Even though I haven't played a ton of their games, Blair Witch was actually really the only game of theirs that I've played, but I thought they handled that game exceptionally well. I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion. I think the Blair Witch game is absolutely freaking fantastic.
Oh, you and me both. I loved that game.
Yeah, it's so good. So I have a lot of faith in them to head this project. But I wonder if, like maybe playtesting or, consultants or whatever, I feel like a lot of people might look at the PS2 version and just say, oh yeah, that's early voice acting. Of course it sounds like that. We can update that. And I don't know. I think the voice acting being so deliberate and jarring and stilted in different ways, it adds so much to the experience. I mean, I'm gonna specifically talk about how I feel like this whole thing is a dream at different points, but without that, it's that Twin Peaks atmosphere. You know what I mean? Where you're never quite sure what's real and what's a dream. Like, why does everything sound so weird?
Yeah, and man, that starts with the opening scene of the game. I mean, you really, right in that opening sequence, is this real or is this all fake?
Yeah, I'm very curious to see what they do with that. I haven't really even watched any of the trailers for Silent Hill 2. Very excited to check that out. So, this is a little bit earlier than usual, but we are going to put a break in right now to start talking about the story. That's because there's just so much to talk about in regards to the story and a lot to talk about that requires some knowledge of it. And like I said, I don't want to spoil this for anybody because I think it's just such a great experience. So if you haven't played the game, maybe play the game and come back whenever you're ready to listen. If you do want to check this game out, emulating, honestly, is probably your best guess. The Silent Hill 2 physical copies for PS2 are quite expensive. Loose at this time is $100. Complete is about $145. So you're going to be paying a pretty penny. Do you know offhand, Dustin, how much the PC version costs?
Feel free to reach out to me on Discord and the pixelprojectradio channel, and I will be happy to help you procure a PC copy of this game.
Well, I know you mentioned that the enhanced edition upgrade is free. I wasn't sure how much this costs on Steam.
That I don't know. I have the file, the exe that I use to install it, but I don't know how much it costs to buy.
I actually don't think this is on Steam. At least it doesn't come up in a search. We talked about the remake, and I think that's something that we should just at least briefly touch on. Dustin, you and I were talking off mic about this. I think we were wrong. I don't think that there is an exclusivity period to PS5 because the Steam version is showing and it says that it's set to unlock in 6 days.
That's good news. I read that there was a 1 year, the first year it was going to be a PlayStation exclusive before it came to PC or anything else. So I would be very happy to be wrong about that so I can play this on day one.
I could have swore that I read that too. I'm almost certain I saw that, but I mean, it's up on Steam and you can pre-purchase it right now.
I'll just pre-purchase it before they change their mind. Maybe they didn't realize yet.
Yeah, then they have to honor it. They can't just give you your money back.
Yes, they definitely can't, take a game off the market 2 weeks after it's released.
No, it's unheard of. Yes, that remake, I think we're all very much looking forward to it. I know I am, especially. That's going to be a day one buy for me for sure. So if you've got a PS5 or a PC that can handle it, definitely give that a go. At the time of recording, obviously it's not out yet. By the time this episode comes out, it will have just come out. So hopefully this little side conversation age as well. Okay, and with that, we are fully jumping in to the spoiler section. We're going to talk about the story. We're going to go through it from beginning to end. Again, no spoilers before story events happen. So, let's dive in and get introduced to James Sunderland as we follow him through the town of Silent Hill 2. And before we start officially, let's get one more piece of community correspondence in from the Discord. This is from Nomad. Here's what Nomad has to say. Sometimes a video game just sticks with a person, and Silent Hill 2 is that game for most of us that have played it. What fascinates me the most about this game is how there are people that can still pull this game apart today and either find something new or find a different way to interpret something, be it a character's words or another subtler message, maybe even something small in the environment. This game can mean so many things to you depending on the message you take from it, and that's something truly special. So Nomad, thank you for the contribution. I hope that you and all of the listeners are satisfied with what we're interpreting from this, because I totally agree. There's a lot that you can draw from what's going on here. So let's talk the intro. This introduction is really fascinating, and it's very famous. A lot of people are familiar with it. It begins with our main character. His name is James Sunderland, and he's observing himself in a mirror. It's a dirty mirror, it's a filthy mirror, and it's a filthy bathroom. And this, especially in retrospect to me, sums up the entire game perfectly. So, I mean, think about it. What do mirrors represent, right? Mirrors represent a reflection of the self, both literally and metaphorically. Right? We look into the mirror and we are seeing who we truly are. Mirrors are totally objective, right? They can't reflect back at you anything that isn't truly there. So the looking at oneself in the mirror is both physical, but you're also looking at yourself for who you truly are on the inside, on a deeper level. And what's so cool about this is James begins by like touching his face. And it's almost like he's not sure, like he's double checking, is this really here? Am I really here? And I think that's so fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they do a great job. You know, the psychological conflict in this game really starts right away. It's not, we needed to set up a intro mission that you have to play through to kind of introduce the story and create that psychological conflict. They achieve so much so quickly. You're really kind of seeing the struggle 20 seconds into the game.
Yeah, exactly so. Exactly so. And this idea of the reflection of oneself and the observation of oneself, keep that in your back pocket, because that's going to be super, super important as we go through. And we're introduced to the premise of the game pretty quickly. We walk outside and we get a voiceover from Mary.
In my restless dreams, I see that town, Silent Hill. You promised you'd take me there again someday, but you never did. Well, I'm alone there now, in our special place, waiting for you.
So somehow we received a letter from Mary, and this is James's late wife. He explains this in a voiceover right after.
I got a letter. The name on the envelope said, Mary. My wife's name. It's ridiculous. Couldn't possibly be true. That's what I keep telling myself. A dead person can't write a letter. Mary died of that damn disease 3 years ago. So then, why am I looking for her? Our special place. What What could she mean? This whole town was our special place. Does she mean the park on the lake? We spent the whole day there. Just the two of us, staring at the water. Could Mary really be there? Is she really alive? Waiting for me?
"3 years after she died. And even though it's ridiculous, he's coming here to look for her because, maybe she's not dead. Maybe she's alive. And he imagines that this special place is the park on the lake. They spent all day staring into the water here. Now, this is something I want to point out, too. This game has a lot of influence from Jungian psychology. Dustin, have you ever looked into Jungian psychology specifically and what water represents?
I have not.
So water in and of itself can be symbolic in so many different ways. Like there's an endless way to interpret what water might mean. But specifically when we're talking about psychology and specifically with Carl Jung, water represents the unconsciousness, right? The depths of one's self. If we're talking about Jung's archetypes, you have the self, but then you also have what is beneath the self, the shadow, the anima, and the animus, which those three are also going to play a part in this story. And water can represent the unconsciousness. So when James mentions we just spent all day staring into the water, we're seeing that reflection motif that was set up immediately in the beginning. Reflection into the subconscious, into the unconsciousness, This is going to be a really important theme. This game is so thematically focused in a way that so many games aren't, and that you would not expect from a horror game. And that's one of the reasons this game is so special.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Actually, I've never heard that. And I'm just thinking about all the times you come across water in the game now, and thinking about what it could have represented. That's really cool.
It makes perfect sense, right?
It does.
So this intro has us walking out to Toluca Lake through, like we mentioned, this incredibly dense fog. What also begins here is another, we've got the reflection motif, and another motif is introduced here, this motif of descent. There is going to be, and this is something that I noticed immediately when I was playing this, but it didn't make much sense until I played through the rest of the game. You are descending, walking downhill or going down almost constantly in this game, to a point where it's hard not to notice it, mainly because you start to think, I've been walking downhill or downstairs or down in general constantly. How does this make archaeological or environmental sense? And that adds to this idea that this all feels like a dream. This doesn't feel like reality. And this is, the descent motif is important for another reason too, that going back to psychology, which we'll talk about later. But even I think it also adds to this idea, what is real? We don't know, and we can't know for a long time.
Yeah, and as you're kind of going down that path and you're descending, it's becoming kind of, more foreboding. The path becomes more claustrophobic. To me, the camera just kind of always sits right where you don't want it to sit to make it feel awkward, if that makes sense. You really feel kind of that descent into his own mind on that path.
Speaking of his mind, we encounter our first red save square somewhere around here. These are little red, they look like red Post-it notes. They're very, very saturated, so they stick out really, really well. You're not going to miss them if you're near a red save square. But the first time you look at one, James says something interesting. He says, "Looking at this makes me feel like someone's groping around in my skull." At first, that doesn't mean a lot. I also think that it's important that whenever you do save, you go to the save screen, it's a close-up of James's face. But more on that later. That's, again, spoilers. We can't talk about that yet. Did that jump out to you, though, whenever you were first playing this game?
The quote itself?
Yeah, the fact that he called it out that way.
It did, but I didn't know why. Like it stood out to me as that's a weird thing to say, you know. And then as you kind of really dive into the game and get into it, it feels less out of place. But in that moment, I think it feels like a weird thing to say. It feels out of place. So it did stand out to me right away.
After a short distance, we arrive in the cemetery here, and this is where we meet our first character named Angela. We don't learn her name right now, actually, but it's not really a spoiler. So this is Angela. What's interesting here is the camera is positioned in such a way that she appears it looks like she's coming out of the grave whenever we meet her, like she pops out from behind a tombstone. And despite her appearance, I mean, she looks like 40s, something. It's a little hard to tell because PS2 graphics, but she looks like she's an adult. She speaks like a little kid. And that too is something that stood out to me that, okay, maybe this isn't reality. My initial read actually on this was that she was dead because she came out from, behind a tombstone and she's speaking like a little child. I was like, okay, maybe she got killed as a child. Why is she here now? More on her later. But it's very disarming. James is asking for directions to Silent Hill, and she'll tell him that she doesn't think that he should go. He's better off staying away. Something is wrong with that town. She also will tell us that she's looking for her mama. She'll correct herself instantly. She says, I'm looking for my mama. I mean my mother. It's the first time we hear her speak in a childish way, and that continues throughout the rest of the game.
Yeah, my initial thought with Angela was just that, she has kind of this very, fearful, disoriented demeanor to her. I think you feel that she is haunted by her past to some degree. Whether that is just at taking it at a surface level, at this point in the game. Maybe that is just struggling with the death of a loved one and she's, mourning them at the cemetery. But you kind of feel that with her, even in just this short interaction. And then you kind of get this nod to, oh, is she also dealing with unresolved trauma? As she talks like a child as a grown woman. So I think the interaction itself, it seems like there's not a lot there, surface level, but I think there really is kind of a lot of elements there as far as, trauma and manifestation of kind of the subconscious fears and things like that.
Yeah, and speaking of that too, she apologizes a lot to James specifically because, I mean, that's really the only person we see her talk to. She is very apologetic, and this is interesting too. Like, why does she seem so fearful of this stranger that's in front of her? It's very strange.
I'm looking for my mama. I mean my mother. It's been so long since I've seen her. I thought my father and brother were here, but I can't find them either. I'm sorry. It's not your problem.
I hope you find them.
Yeah, no, I picked up on that right away as well. And I think there's kind of, you really do feel like she is struggling with something as well. And you don't know what, and you don't know why she's here or any of that yet. But I think you kind of immediately pick up that, hey, she's also dealing with something.
Yeah, absolutely. So we go down more. We're still descending. I actually think that it kind of looked like we go through the same street that the intro of Silent Hill 1 had, where the car crash happened. I'm not sure. It looks similar, but this will take us into the town of Silent Hill, and pretty similar to the first one. We see a trail of blood being left by this shadow, this creature, and we follow it, and this is where we get the first encounter with it. I think we talked about the monster symbolism and how we're going to leave that to the end, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this first encounter, you get right up and close and personal with it. You take is it a pipe or is it a plank? And you just beat it to death?
You start with the plank, and then you can get the pipe a little later.
Around here, there's also a corpse you can find, a dead body, and there are scattered journal pages. And if you read each one, it's the first indication that this town shows things differently to different people. The journal will say something to the effect of, I know I saw these monsters, but my friend said he didn't, but I know I saw them. It's the first hint that this town shows people different things. And that's going to become very apparent pretty soon.
Yeah, and to backtrack just slightly, really, it was during that same scene for me, but, shortly after that, you're faced with some monsters again. And one thing that really stuck out to me, the first time and the second time you run into these monsters, is James' lack of reaction. He's seeing kind of these grotesque creatures, and he doesn't react with extreme horror. He's just so calm in the face of these, these horrors and grotesque monsters. It's like he's been desensitized to these things. I thought that was really interesting.
Right, desensitized, or, I mean, again, it's like dream logic, right? If you're in a dream, you just know what to do. You just act and you don't think about it. It's kind of the same thing here. Like, if this were a dream, well, of course he wouldn't be that afraid.
Yeah, that's very true. And I mean, it's just saying, you know exactly what you're supposed to do in a dream. Well, you see these monsters, so what do? Oh, well, you walk over there and you pick up a radio and you obviously take that plank of wood to kill the monsters with, right? I mean, it's common sense. That's exactly what is happening. You just know what to do. It's really, really odd. It really struck me, the first time I went through it.
Yeah, exactly. So nearby, you'll find a bar Neely's, and you'll find a map in there that will sort of point you to this nearby apartment complex. So that's going to be our first large set piece that we go through. I liked the design of this a lot. There's something about the hallways of an apartment that I think lends itself really, really well to horror.
And I think confinement is a kind of a theme in this game.
Yeah.
And I think this is the first time we experience that. And it's such a stark contrast to like the open world of walking around Silent Hill and the fog covered streets, going from that open world into these, like, again, I've used the word claustrophobic many times, but you go into these claustrophobic hallways and the dim lighting, and you feel trapped. As soon as you walk into the apartments, you feel trapped.
Yeah, that's a good point. The confinement is a really big aspect of what makes this work. Oh, one thing that we didn't mention. You start this game with two things in your inventory. You get a picture of your late wife, Mary, from before she got sick, and that letter that she read at the top that I put in. You start with both of those. We'll talk more about this later, but the more you look at those, it can influence which of these endings you get. The way that the endings are handled is very clever, and if you look at these or don't look at them, it can influence what ending you ultimately get. I thought that was very neat. In the apartments, you get your first flashlight. You get your only flashlight, I should say. You get it from a mannequin wearing clothes that seems to surprise James. He doesn't say anything. He just says, like, well, but these clothes, ... Again, replays or on retrospect, that makes a lot more sense. This apartment is also where we meet Laura. She is a little child. There's this gated off section of the apartments, right? And there's there are bars running up and down. And there's a key right through the bars, right out of reach. And when we go to reach for it, Laura appears. She's this little girl. She kicks the key, stomps on her hand, laughs at us, and then just runs away. Immediately, we're dealing with a little shit.
Such a little shit.
She is. She's being a little shit. She's being very antagonistic towards James.
And it's just the beginning. I mean, it's nonstop with this girl.
Yeah, at first, it's like, okay, she's a kid. She's just doing kid stuff. But, does that continue? Well, we'll see. We get our first gun here as well. Something that I found, I don't know if you've seen this quote or whatever. The gun you find here is in a shopping cart, which they did deliberately to sort of poke fun at the idea of how readily available guns are in America. I thought that was pretty good. It's pretty funny.
That is very funny.
That is very funny.
I'm laughing.
After we get the gun, we're still contending with some of the monsters in here, but in one of the hallways, we see Pyramid Head for the first time. Now, he's referred to in the game by James as the Red Pyramid thing, but I think in some of the descriptions of items, he's called Pyramid Head, but that's what the creator calls him as well. Pyramid Head is kind of the symbol of Silent Hill at this point, to the point where they added him into future games, and the creator disagrees with that by a lot and doesn't like it. And I agree. I think after playing this, I don't see how you could incorporate Pyramid Head for anything other than fan service, but, that's just me. We see him, he's beyond another barred gate, so we can't get through. And when I saw him, you walk up to that barred gate, and he's just standing there, standing perfectly still. And if you're looking at him, presumably you're also standing still. And when I was playing this, the first thing that I thought back to was the mirror motif, right? Thinking back to the very beginning about this idea of reflection, the reflection of oneself. And when I was looking at Pyramid Head, I had this moment, and I was like, okay, Pyramid Head is a reflection of me, of James Sunderland. I don't know how, but somehow I think that might be the case. Or conversely, another way you can think about this is not like a mirror, but think about what gates represent. They represent separation, sort of like a jail cell. And then you can ask, well, who is the one being jailed here? Is it James or is it the monster? There's a lot of different ways you can go with this. Like going back to Nomad's point, there's a lot of different reads through the environment and through what's being presented to you. And one of the best things about this game is that there's just enough ambiguity to where a lot of these can be right at the same time.
Yeah, I also immediately picked up on kind of the mirror. It feels like you are looking at yourself in the mirror. That was exactly how I interpreted that part as well.
It's really cool. It's very effective because he's gone. If you go into a room nearby, and when you leave again, he's just totally gone. That room that you go into, did I say mirror? I meant to say room. Well, either way, doesn't matter. Directly after you go into that room, there's this clock puzzle, which was very easy. I was kind of surprised. I played this on normal, but I thought this was like a super duper obvious puzzle. There's a dead body sitting in this room, and you can't see it in the game. Like James as a character will see it in the game, but the players don't get to see the face. The character model, though, you could tell it's James sitting dead on this chair.
Yeah, I played it on normal as well. I did, a third of the way through or so. I was wishing I was on hard. But I thought the clock puzzle was too easy. But I did like kind of its place. I think, you're kind of forced to interact with time and acknowledge that time is not moving. Kind of, again, leaning back to that dream, right? So I thought kind of having that interaction with time was a really neat element. And, I would like to actually circle back to the exact scene you're talking about, where you see the body in the chair. There's a TV with static on, circle back to that a little later.
Yes, this is placed here very intentionally. Again, there's going to be so much going through this where it's like, yep, we can't talk about that right now. We'll talk about it later. But you'll just have to trust us.
If there's one thing I could say to somebody who's about to play this game for the first time, everything is intentional in this game. So if you see something that stands out to you, remember it, and then think about it later.
There is a section here whenever you're getting a key where James reaches into a hole. The note that I have here is something that I'm pretty sure we led off with, this idea that, horror lets you scare yourself. Why is the can of worms there? I don't know. You scare yourself, imagining it. But this brings us into our first encounter with Pyramid Head. So you walk into this apartment, and Pyramid Head is in there already, engaging in a forced sexual encounter with two of these monsters. And these monsters in particular, they are essentially two sets of legs that are stacked on top of each other. So picture somebody cut off at the torso, and then just having another set of legs but upside down coming out. So there are legs that stand on the ground and legs that are up in the air. I think it's obvious to tell these are supposed to be female legs. So this is, believe it or not, this is important. And Pyramid Head is with two of these monsters, and he is sexually assaulting them to the point where they die. Afterwards, those two monsters are dead. And what's interesting here is James runs into the closet, and he's like watching this for a while, which at first I how do I want to phrase this? I think this is really an unsubtle nod of voyeurism. Like it's possibly suggesting that James is, voyeuristic. I don't know why else they would have showed us watching Pyramid Head do this sexual assault from the closet. But what happens is Pyramid Head finishes that encounter and then walks towards the closet door, does some weird motions that I'm not quite sure they mean anything other than just to be unsettling. And then James begins to just fire his gun, Frank Reynolds style, out of the closet and into Pyramid Head.
So anyway, I started blasting.
Anyway, I started blasting. Bang! Wow. Bang! Well, I don't see so good, so I missed.
Yeah, exactly. What did you, I know it might be tough to think back to like your first time, but like, what did you make of this? Your first time seeing it? Were you shocked to see like such an overtly sexual act being performed here?
Yeah, I think, it was, I think it was kind of like, it was a little shocking. But I didn't think past the surface level of he's doing this thing. I didn't think about what it represents. So this, just visually, right, seeing that is a shocking scene. But when you kind of take it into everything else that's going on and kind of what it really represents, then it's really jarring, right? But I think even just the scene itself was a little shocking. It's like, wow, where did this come from? And that might be the first time you see the mannequins. You probably run into them before that. I don't recall, but I think it is a jarring scene just visually. But then when you really kind of think about the themes that it represents and really what it means, it's a very jarring scene.
I think you do see them before, but you mentioned what this represents at this point in time. I can imagine somebody, because this person used to be me. I used to be very self-conscious. Like, I don't even know that I've ever told you this, but I used to be very self-conscious about not knowing how to read things in like literature or video games or stuff like that. Like I remember, and it's because whenever I was in like high school, I was I was trying so hard, like, everything's got to mean something. And I was trying to lock everything on 1-to-1. So I used to be very self-conscious when people would say like, oh yeah, this is what this means in this story. Did you see that? And inside I was like, no, I didn't see that at all. And it made me feel very self-conscious. So all this to say, I can empathize with somebody hearing us talk about this and thinking like, what do you mean reading into this? Like, what does it mean? Like, I don't know what it means. At this point in the game, you shouldn't know what it means. You're not meant to know. You're not meant to know. It's not a cosmic knowledge. But
no, there's a great deal of reflection after you play this game and think about these things.
Yes.
When you first play it, nothing needs to mean anything. And then after you kind of have time to digest, you can reflect and see these things. But yeah, when you're playing through it, if you try to interpret those things while you're playing it, it's going to be very difficult because there's just so much you don't know yet.
Right, exactly. You can be observant, but just keep things in your pocket, right? Like all we know for sure right now is that there was a forced sexual encounter with these monsters, and for some reason, James was watching it from the closet.
Yeah, and I thought this was a really interesting, how to phrase it. It's kind of like this conflict between like being attracted and repulsed by something, at the same time. It kind of blurs the line between like sexual attraction and repulsion because he's horrified, but he's still watching.
Right.
It's really interesting.
And if you really, really wanted to, you could analyze that even further and ask yourself, why does he feel repulsed while watching? I think, we're kind of just saying this and going off of what we have read elsewhere. But there are some folks that engage in this kind of behavior, this voyeuristic behavior, and feel disgusted by it. So pulling that knowledge from the real world into this scenario, we could say, well, why is he doing that? And why does he seem disgusted, but why does he not look away? It's, we can ask a lot of questions is what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a really cool first encounter. Very effective. Well, I guess second, but now we get, we go through more of these puzzles. And by the way, I should have said this up top. I apologize, but we're not going to go over every puzzle, every single setting. We'll call out to some that we get to, but it would just be very tedious and kind of kill the pace if we stop at every single clue and every single memo and every single puzzle. So a lot of this, we are just going to move forward and just talk about the story. And speaking of story, we meet another new character here named Eddie. Eddie, I hate to say this because, it kind of ties into his character, but he's so easy to laugh at.
Yeah, he's... I love Eddie until I don't. But yeah, he's easy to laugh at. He makes himself easy to laugh at, and obviously that becomes a big theme later. But yeah, love Eddie.
We find him in one of the apartments. He is puking into a toilet. We can hear it from the hallway. And the reason he's puking is because there's a dead body in the room with him. I love that James, like multiple times in this game, will see something horrifying and you'll inspect it and he'll say, who could have done this? And it's like, man, you just saw that dude through the closet. Like, who do you think? Who do you think, dude?
And I think it's this scene with Eddie. It may be the next one, but it's a great example of the kind of exaggerated voice actings. Eddie, what did you do? It's really great.
Absolutely. Totally. When we walk up to Eddie here, immediately he starts apologizing and he's saying, I didn't do it. It wasn't me. I didn't do it. I didn't kill him.
Eddie, who's that dead guy in the kitchen?
I didn't do it. I swear I didn't kill anybody.
You're not friends with that red pyramid thing.
Red pyramid thing? I don't know what you're talking about. Honest. But I did see some weird looking monsters. They scared the hell out of me, so I ran in here.
This is every character that has interacted with James so far at this point. I remember actually sending this to you in a text as I got past this point. Every single character is hostile or views James as a hostile presence for some reason. Angela was apologizing in the graveyard. I'm so sorry. Laura is just stepping on his hand and laughing at him. And now Eddie sees him come in and he's like, no, you don't understand. I didn't do it. It wasn't me. And I'm asking myself, why? Why do people view James this way?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's like James' presence caused kind of this, I don't know, does James' presence somehow cause like me to confront my past actions or what's going on there, right? Because every time we've run into somebody so far, they're denying some past action. Yeah, it's really odd, and it really, you are trying to understand what role is James playing in their story.
Yes, and it's a little bit subversive too. Because I'll say that my initial readings of this weren't entirely correct, and I think that's done really well. I love how they frame it in such a way where different things could be possible, and we'll get more context for it pretty soon. For right now, Eddie is still, he's so sorry, I didn't do it. And we ask him if he saw the red pyramid thing, that thing that probably killed the guy in this room. Eddie has no idea what James is talking about. Eddie has not seen this red pyramid thing, but he says he has seen some weird looking monsters. He sings something together that I didn't clock into this immediately on my playthrough, but remember back to the journal that we found in the street, right? It was suggesting that different people see different things in this town. Eddie has not seen the red pyramid thing. What's going on?
Yeah, is Eddie seeing the same monsters I'm seeing?
Right, exactly. So in this complex, there's a little memo that we can find. I'm not always a big collectible person in games, but I think with Silent Hill, all of the memos are really integral in fleshing out the world and the town. Some of them, we're probably not going to talk about a lot of them here. Like some of them flesh out the history of the town, the history of prison that we go to, and they're all very, very interesting, but not all of them tie in directly to what's happening in Silent Hill 2's plot. So we'll maybe not mention all of them, but this one here is a memo detailing Walter Sullivan. He was a murderer that was arrested recently, and he died via suicide by soup spoon. He really wanted to die, I guess, and he stabbed himself with a soup spoon.
Commitment. That's tough.
Yeah, you've got to be really committed to the bit. We'll see his name appear later, and also I actually think he also appears in Silent Hill 3.
Oh, okay.
I'm not 100% sure about that.
That's another one that I've played a very long time ago, and I don't remember.
This in this little newspaper clipping that you find here, he's talking about the murders that he did and how he died by soup spoon. They interviewed somebody that was like, he didn't look like the type to kill anyone. And then they go on to like wonder, oh, well, he has been saying some weird things like, oh, he made me do it. It's not my fault. I did it, but he made me do it. The red man made me do it. And they ends with, actually, now that you mention it, he was kind of crazy. I got such a big laugh out of me.
Yeah, no, I love it. And, circling back to kind of the idea of the memos in this game a little bit. I agree. I'm not one that always loves collectibles, but I like the way the memos are done in this game because they do teach you a lot about the world and the history of Silent Hill, the town and all of that. But I mean, you really could get through the game without picking up a single memo and not miss any crucial story elements. You're going to have a better story, a better experience if you do grab some of the memos. But I like that they aren't necessarily crucial elements to appreciating the story of the game.
Yeah, a lot of them are required. I'm trying to think back. I'm not sure which ones are and which ones are not. But yeah, you're right. You're right. I think you could go through without collecting all of these and you'll be okay.
Yeah, definitely a lot added with them. But, some of them, if you skip them, you wouldn't, you'd still be able to appreciate the story of the game.
There's a scene right after this where James digs into a toilet for a key clue. I just wanted to put this here for two reasons. One, because, we've been talking about dream logic this whole time, right? And this is another thing. James sees this disgusting, putrid toilet full of, well, probably literal shit and metaphorical shit, just disgusting. And he just reaches his hand as deep inside as he can. That is so crazy to me. He doesn't even think twice about it. He just reaches in. And
again, it feels like he does it because he knows he has to.
Right. He doesn't even necessarily see anything. You just walk up and you're like, oh, it's filled with this. Put your hand in. He's like,
yeah. I mean, there's nothing that implies there's something in there. You just walk in. It's like, yep, I got to stick my arm down there. Which, if you are playing it on a surface level, can feel like bad writing. How did he know he needed to stick his arm in there? But when you start to really look at all the elements and kind of that dream logic, it makes a lot of sense.
I was convinced for a long time that this whole thing was a dream. This whole everything. It actually, that's one of the amazing things about this game is that the ambiguity is done so well that you could probably argue that this was a dream. There's no definitive, I mean, that's a little bit of a spoiler, maybe depending on how you define spoiler, but you don't get a ton of definitive conclusions from this game. There is a definitive set of events that have happened, but the ambiguity is set up intentionally in such a way to where not everything is explained. Once again, going back to what makes good horror, it lets you scare yourself. And also it gives people like us an avenue to just talk about it. Right? It's not interesting all the time to have a story define literally every single thing, because then what do you do from there? How do you talk about it? We could talk about this for days because, my experience and my interpretation is going to be different than yours, and ours is going to be different than the person listening to this. It's so, I love this game so much. I really, really do.
Yeah, buckle up, everybody. We're about to talk for days.
We certainly could. We're changing this podcast is now definitively a Silent Hill podcast. And we're going to do all of the bad ones next.
Great. Can't wait. Let's do the movies.
There's also, reaching into the toilet, plunging. What is plunging but a way to descend the hand? So we're back to this idea of descent. It's everywhere. We run into Angela again. Here, this is where she formally introduces herself. She is in this room that looks like a dance studio. Like, am I crazy for thinking that? There's like a wall that is entirely a mirror, which again, let's go back to that mirror analogy, right? Reflection. This is a very obvious imagery here, but it looks like a dance studio in an apartment. What is happening here?
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I was like, why is the entire wall a mirror? Yeah, very odd.
Well, I mean, speaking of the mirror, Angela is laying in front of the mirror with a knife, and she is just staring at her reflection. This, now that I say it out loud, maybe this isn't a very subtle symbol, actually. But she's laying in front of the mirror with this giant knife in her hand, and she says she hasn't found her mother yet. And James notices the knife, and he says, I don't know what you're planning here, but there's always another way. And she says, really? But you're the same as me. It's easier just to run. Besides, it's what we deserve. And hearing this, James immediately says, no, I'm nothing like you. I'm not like you.
But you're the same as me. It's easier just to run. Besides, is what we deserve.
No, I'm not like you.
Are you afraid? I'm sorry.
This will happen multiple times. James will deny. I'm not like you. I'm not like you. It happens a suspicious amount. Enough for you to notice it, but not enough for it to be super obvious.
Yeah, no, this early part of the game, especially for James, denial is a huge part of it. And I think when you walk in and you see Angela, running means two different things to them. They're both going through their own things. I think you kind of get some not so subtle kind of symbolizing, her desire for self-harm. For him, running looks different, but she's saying, it's easier just to run. We're the same. But yeah, denial in this part of the game is huge for James. I mean, it really never stops.
She will freak out when James very rationally assumes that her mother lives here or lived here, right? She says she's looking for her mother, and he'll say something to the effect of, well, did she live in this apartment? And she'll say, I don't know. And he says, well, she must have lived in Silent Hill, or something to that effect. And she freaks out. She's saying, how could you know that? What are you talking about? How do you know? And it completely catches you off guard, because that's a very rational thing to say or assume, considering she is here looking for her. But this sort of, I mean, there's not a ton to look into to that. I think for me, it just really made me think about and examine how twitchy and paranoid and on edge Angela was. And again, there's still that element too of like, why is everybody treating James like he is not a human being that is standing in front of them? Yeah, no, I think this was, that kind of reaction from her was just a good look at her mental state right now. If nothing else, if that's all you take it for, it's a good representation of what her mental state is right now. Yeah, totally. James will offer to go with her. She's getting up to leave to look for her mother. James will offer to go, and she says no, and she'll ask him to hold her knife. She says she doesn't know what she might do, but when he ends up approaching her, she immediately screams and holds it in defense. She then says over and over again that she's so sorry and that she's been bad, and then she puts the knife down and just runs out. At this point, I'm not sure why these characters view James as such a hostile presence. Also, why is Angela very quick to apologize and paint herself as being in the wrong? I've been bad. What's that about? Yeah, no, I think, you kind of see more and more as you interact with her, this kind of reflection of what her trauma that she's dealing with is some kind of environment where she was quick to apologize or take the blame or, whatever it may be. I think these outbursts from her and these reactions and constant apologizing is
you're learning a lot about her. Again, it's one of those things where surface level, it doesn't mean much, and then you start to really like think about it, and you're like, okay, we're learning a lot about this character in this 30-second interaction.
Right, exactly. And I'm not saying that I put this together immediately on my first playthrough, but if you're a keen observer and you think back to her characterization of being a child, what kind of child is always quick to apologize, say that they've been bad, and be defensive, like scared of authority? Usually it's children that are constantly being, degraded or abused, right? That's sort of the natural coping mechanism that children going through that will put up. And if you're a keen observer, you might pick that up and you might say, I wonder if there's a connection there. And to that we say, maybe, but we'll also whisper to you, like, so nobody else can hear, that's a very good observation and you should keep that in mind.
It'll come back later, don't worry.
Yeah, and after we whisper that to you, we give you a little thumbs up and a wink, and we slip you a $5 bill.
Say, go get him, Tiger.
Great job. We are now going to fight Pyramid Head. This is our first boss fight. You see Pyramid Head, we're in this room, and he's once again sexually attacking the leg monsters, and then we fight him. This fight is kind of, I don't want to say you do one fight in Silent Hill 2 and you've seen them all, but kind of. All of the boss fights in this game amount to run to the corner, shoot until you have to run again, and then shoot, and then just repeat. It's a little underwhelming,
It is. Yeah, no, I agree. When I said I wish I would have been on hard, things like this are why. I don't know if you died at all playing the game. I didn't die at all. And yeah, definitely underwhelming on normal difficulty. I don't know if maybe he moves faster or anything like that on the harder difficulties, but yeah, it was a very underwhelming boss fight. The only thing that I kind of stood out to me was kind of, again, that sense of like claustrophobia.
So he does move faster on harder difficulties.
Okay.
And I did die before. This isn't really a spoiler, but later on in the game, you can find Pyramid Head's lair, and you can find an extra sword of his. It's called the Great Knife. And you can use it, but it's far and away the slowest weapon in the game. But it's also like, you can one-hit kill some bosses on normal. And I tried to do it to a boss, and it just got me into a loop of getting attacked before I could do anything. And I died. But I had saved right before because I knew it was coming, and I was like, I want to try it. And no, you should not do that.
I did use it once, and I that will come much later. I did.
I wonder
use
if
it once.
I wonder if we did the same thing. Was it purely for dramatic effect?
It was.
Yep. Yep. Same thing.
I love it.
I knew it.
Oh.
Yeah. The more I think about it, this game is like a very Rick kind of game, because I am somebody that is very much like story and writing first, and I can forgive a lot of gameplay stuff. Like, don't get me wrong, if it's not fun, then I'll get annoyed, but I very much I am not somebody that needs like constant engaging gameplay. So something where it's like, run to the corner, shoot, that's fine, because everything else around it is so cool.
Yeah, and it's, again, it's the type of game it is, right? If this type of game doesn't need Elden Ring boss battles, that would feel out of place. It would be way too much. The boss fights are underwhelming, but they're underwhelming from a gameplay standpoint. I don't think they're underwhelming from a story, atmosphere, immersion standpoint.
If Pyramid Head as a Souls boss would be pretty damn cool, though.
I don't know why no one's done it yet.
Oh, I'm sure the creator would hate that idea. Because why would Pyramid Head be there?
Well, somebody needs to make a mod, is all I'm saying.
You can, I don't know if you saw this, but if you pre-order, I don't know if it's a pre-order bonus for the deluxe edition or if it's just in the deluxe edition, but if you buy the deluxe edition, at least on Steam, one of the bonuses you get 2 little masks. One is the Shiba Inu mask with the joke ending of the dog, and the other is a Pyramid Head mask made out of pizza boxes.
Incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the first 90 minutes of the game was leaked a little while ago, and at the very end the person playing it puts that on. It's pretty good.
I love that. I didn't see that yet. I meant to look that up.
This fight is actually pretty interesting. You don't have to fight him. You can just avoid him for 3 minutes, which is extremely easy to do because he is very, very slow. And, you know, after that 3 minutes elapses, or after you shoot him enough times, these sirens begin to blare. And Pyramid Head will walk towards the stairs. Something that we didn't mention is that the stairs, the only way out is flooded. Like the stairs are completely encased in water. And after the sirens blare, Pyramid Head walks towards the stairs. If you try to get too close to him like I did and say like, yeah, that's right, motherfucker, get out of here. If you do that, he will swing at you. So, you know, be careful.
I also learned that the hard way.
Yeah. But as he's walking away, he walks completely into the water. He's submerging himself. So again, I mean, think back to the water. We're now playing with two motifs here, water and submerging, plunging, descending. And it's almost like he's showing James where to go, because after he submerges, the water drains and you have to follow him to proceed. So it's like he's leading James along. And when I first noticed that, my thought to myself was, I'm reading too much into this. And it turns out, no, I was not at all. Like, that is intentional. Like you said, Dustin, everything in this game is intentional. This game is so goddamn good.
Yeah, same thing, man. I see these things and I'm like, oh, that doesn't mean anything. It definitely does. You know, you're following him down there for a reason. It's man, it's so good.
After you do follow him, you leave, you get out of these apartments and you're back into the streets. Somehow, even though you've just descended so much, you're back into the streets. How does that work? Well, who knows? Is it a dream, or is it there for a symbolic reason? I wonder. But you meet Lara again. She's just kind of sitting on this wall, like doing the little kid thing of kicking their feet and like singing out of tune. And she will run off again, but she antagonizes you a little bit. You know, you talk to her and you're like, what's a little girl like you doing here? And she'll say, are you blind or something? Which, at that point to me, I didn't know what to make of that. I was like, is she not a little girl? Are we not where I think we are? I don't know. But what's very interesting here is you'll ask her about Mary. You're like, you know, have you seen Mary? Blah, blah, blah. And before she runs off, she says, what do you care? You didn't love Mary anyway.
You didn't love Mary anyway.
Wait! How do you know Mary's name?
And I think James, I can't remember if James asks this. I think he does, but he's like, how do you know Mary? And that's what I'm asking too. How do you know Mary?
And that was the first time anybody really acknowledged why James is here. That's what stood out to me, is this little girl seems to be the only one that knows why you're here.
Right, yeah.
And I don't even know that, I mean, you know you're looking for Mary, but that's all you know. Like, it seems like she knows more than James knows.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good point. Laura is a very interesting character, and when we get towards the end, I'd be interested to revisit the discussion of characters, because, like, I don't know what to make of her exactly, and I don't know how I feel about her. I don't know. Do you have any strong thoughts or anything that you could share that aren't like spoiler laden?
No, I think it's better to keep it.
Yeah.
I think it's better to leave that for later.
Yeah, I figured that would be the case. She's the one character that I'm not sure what to make of, but you know, we'll get there, I suppose. Nearby, there's this park. It's called Rosewater Park. You can find a lot of goodies in here, like you know, ammunition and health packs and stuff like that, if you want to search around. It's a little confusing because it's just on the map, it's just a square, but on the inside, there's like garden walls and, you know, stuff like that. Little tough. I got out of here as soon as I could, to be honest. But here, you meet somebody very interesting named Maria. Did this blow your mind, seeing her as much as it did me the first time?
Yeah. And I think I'll let you get into a little bit about you know, how she presents herself and how you come across her and everything. But I think her role is blatantly obvious almost right away. Yeah, it was kind of shocking running into her.
It is, and it's shocking for one major reason. She looks identical to your dead wife, Mary. And you say that to her, like, except for how she does her hair and how she's dressed, she could be Mary. Now, her hair has, actually, she looks a lot like Skylar White, I thought. I think she looks identical to Skylar White from Breaking Bad. But her hair is kind of short, like shoulder length, and it's tipped with red. So that's number one. And two, she is dressed very provocatively, wearing high boots, a skirt, a red top that shows a lot of cleavage, and a choker. I didn't bother to confirm this, but I heard a source that I think is reliable say that she was directly modeled after, her dress was directly modeled after, oh gosh, it was either like Pamela Anderson or Christina Aguilera or J-Lo, one of them, like hosting the Teens Choice Awards. You know, like they modeled the dress after that.
Okay.
I don't know. I thought it was funny. I don't know.
That's interesting. No, I think it, you know, it does look exactly like Mary, but it's kind of this overly sexualized version of Mary that you did not get to experience because of her illness, or, you know, or because that's just not who she was. You know, we don't know, but yeah, it's like this overly sexualized version of Mary.
She's immediately very, very flirtatious with James. You know, you're saying like, oh, you're not Mary. You can't be Mary. You're, you know, and she's like, I'm Maria. But she'll say, see, feel how warm I am. And she just grabs your hand and puts it on her face. Immediately, very flirtatious. And like you said, very sexualized. And that's something to really pay attention to for two reasons. One, well, I mean, it's pretty obvious. Mary, Maria, they're fundamentally the same name, right? It's not a coincidence that she looks identical to your wife. So then the next course of questioning is, okay, why? There are two routes you could go down. One, this is how James I don't know how to say this without like spoiling things. I'm trying to think back to what I thought of this whenever I was playing it. It seems like this is a version of Mary, his late wife, that he would find particularly attractive. She's kind of like, I hate saying this, please don't misinterpret me, but she's kind of like the quote unquote ideal woman for the main character, right? She's dressed very coquettishly. She's extremely flirtatious with you. She kind of acts like, you know, well, I need help. Like, you know, I'm the damsel. That's kind of where I was when I first met her. This is, for some reason, we're seeing James's late wife in a very idealized presentation. Does that make sense?
It does. That's actually exactly what I was going to say. She's kind of like, you know, because the Mary that, you know, he knew in the last part of her life, we presume, and is kind of, you've been led to believe at this point, is she was sick, right? She was ill and she was weak and sick. So Maria is everything James wanted Mary to be, both in appearance and her kind of her you know, flirtatiousness and everything. You know, that's really what he wishes Mary was.
Right, exactly. Now the next question is why? Well, not yet. We'll figure that out pretty soon. She invites herself along with James. You know, she specifically calls out her appearance to Mary. She'll say, well, I look like her, don't I? You loved her, didn't you? Or maybe you hated her.
I look like Mary, don't I? You loved her, right? Or maybe you hated her.
Don't be ridiculous.
So it's okay?
Yeah, fine.
And I can't remember. Oh, yes, he does. Right here, like after she says that, he'll say, don't be ridiculous. You know, James has a tendency to snap at people, and it's always either, well, sometimes it's whenever they mention he didn't love Mary. And that's what he does here. He said, don't be ridiculous. Very, very interesting.
It is interesting. And again, this is another character that, why does she know what she knows? Why does she know so much about Mary? Why does she know she looks like Mary? Well,
I think he did just tell her that, right?
That's true. Yeah. And he told her she looks like her, but there's just a lot of her knowing like personal details about Mary and their relationship. Again, just another character that seems to know more than they should know.
Right. And we have many questions. So the next place you two go is this bowling alley. You walk up to it. I don't think this has any meaning. Maybe it does. I just think it's funny. You walk up to it and Maria's like, oh, I'll wait out here. I hate bowling. And he's like, I'm not here to play. But you go in without her. And I agree. I was like, what? You're not there to throw strikes, man. Just go in.
Yeah, I thought that was actually one of the funniest parts of the game. I also thought the horrors of Silent Hill clearly don't bother her, was kind of what I picked up there. She doesn't mind standing outside by herself for some reason. So, why is this environment not scary to her? Why is she not afraid to stand out there by herself?
Oh, wow. That's a really good point. I hadn't even considered that. Yeah. So she's like, I'll stay out here where all the monsters are, but like bowling is where I draw the line.
Right. Exactly.
That's interesting.
Really, really odd. But again, it's, Silent Hill seems to be a different place. Everybody sees things differently. So that, other than it being a really funny moment, that was the only thing I really picked up there.
Yeah, that's a good catch, man. So we go inside and we see Eddie and Laura in there. I don't know if James sees this. We as the players see it. I think he just hears it. But Eddie is in there. He's gorging on a pizza, just going to town. And Laura is there talking with him. She's like, what did you do? Like, was it robbery, murder? And he says, nothing like that. And you said that was the funniest part. This got a huge laugh out of me when he says like, oh, nothing bad like that. She calls him a gutless fatso.
So what'd you do? Robbery? Murder?
Nah, nothing like that.
Huh, you're just a gutless fatso.
What'd you have to say that for?
I thought you said the cops were after you.
No, I just ran because I was scared.
Which is just an A+ insult. Perfect wordplay, succinct, gutless fatso. No notes. That's beautiful.
No notes. She destroyed him. I mean, I think, we're talking about descent. I think, that's where Eddie's descent starts, when he got torn apart. She called him a gutless fatso, and it was all downhill from there.
Well, he's, he'll go on, like they're talking, and she mentions like, well, if you didn't do anything so bad, just apologize. And he says, it's no good. They wouldn't listen. Nobody will ever forgive me. So it seems like he's eating his feelings here, and he's got a very low self-image, right? He's very critical, and he's taking his sadness out by gorging himself on pizza, which, by the way, James will find them. Laura has run away at that point, and we're going to chase after her in a second. But, James will ask him what he's doing, and he'll say, this town is crawling with monsters. How can you sit there and eat pizza? I think you mentioned that earlier, right?
Yeah, he's Eddie, what are you doing? This is where some of that over the top voice acting comes into play. It's really great.
And eat pizza? Yeah, all we can say for sure is that it seems like he has a very low opinion of himself, and we don't know why. And he is portrayed as a little fat kid, and he's eating his feelings now, so maybe that ties into his character. We don't know yet. We after we're there, we've got to go find Laura. We got to find out what her deal is. We go outside. Maria wasn't able to catch her, so we go after her together. We find Maria says that she saw where she went, and she went down this back alley, and we go there, but it's too tight. We're grown people. We can't fit through the little crevices. So Maria points out a door, This is really fascinating. It's locked, but Maria has the keys for some reason. And I think there's 3 of them, and she's hidden them in her dress in very sexual places. Like one's in her boot, one is like in her skirt, and the other is in her bra. And while she's unlocking the door, James just cannot help but just ogle her. And think back to the Pyramid Head scene where he's just watching him do this awful assault through the closet. Now suddenly that idea of voyeurism and sexual deviancy, now suddenly we have a little more ammunition to play with there. Like he's very comically trying to catch a glimpse while she's doing this stuff. And she's delighting in it. Like she's playing into it. She knows.
Yeah. And it's kind of that, sexualization of Mary. And now it's gone from, there was one weirdly sexual thing that happened to now a recurring theme. So it's kind of its weight in the game. I don't know. This is where I start to feel it, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, it makes total sense. Speaking of the sexualization aspect, I want to make one more point. But also, whenever we go inside this little room, there are some liquor bottles here. If you observe them, you can kind of get an idea that James might have a drinking problem. Like he says, like, oh, well, I don't have any use for these. If you observe anything in this game that James doesn't need, he'll say, I don't have any use for that. But with these, he'll say, like, I don't need these. It's not that I don't like drinking. In fact, I do it quite a bit. It's the only way I can, like, get away from something or other. It's implying that he's got a drinking problem, which, interesting. But back to the sexualization thing that you mentioned. We're going now into the hospital. This is where Lara ran to. We catch up to her. We see her run in. You and Maria are going to go look for her. This is where we get introduced to a new enemy type called bubblehead nurses. And these nurses are very interesting. They're not at all like the nurses in Silent Hill 1. These nurses have like the cliche sexy Halloween nurse kind of look to them, right? Like stockings and buxom tops. You know what I'm trying to say? We all know this. We all know what this is. Just Google, stop your car and Google sexy nurse, and you'll get a good idea here.
Yep, that's exactly what they are.
I wonder, Dustin, I wonder if you notice this, man. It's kind of hard to see, at least on the PS2 version. I don't know if it's clearer in the PC version, but you might have to check out the concept art. Did you see what's on the face of these nurses?
I thought it was bandages. So if their faces aren't covered in bandages, then I don't know.
There are bandages, but there's also a little red square.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, where else have we seen those before?
Yeah, I did not know that.
Now again, at this point in time, that might not mean a lot to you if you're following along, but the long and short of it is that's there for a reason. That is intentionally placed. And that's where we're going to stop for today. Like we said, next time it'll be from the hospital up until the end of the game. This is, Dustin, this is something Dustin mentioned to me when we were talking about where to stop for today. The game kind of takes a bit of a turn at this point. So this is a pretty sensible stopping point. Next time it'll be from here to the end of the game. It'll feature some discussions about characters and monster design once we get through the story. And yeah, I'm really excited about it. I wonder, we haven't decided when we're going to record the next part because little peek behind the curtain. I've been doing so many peeks behind the curtain lately, I have no shame. But
let's just take the curtain down.
Yeah, geez, at this point, who's the man behind the curtain? Well, it's this fat guy in his boxers recording a podcast. I'm just kidding. I don't wear boxers, but I wear boxer briefs. I should cut this out. This is just because the Silent Hill 2 is sexualized in theme doesn't mean I have to be. Anyway, geez, who listens to this show? We're deciding on the fly to split this up in two because we just have a lot that we could talk about with this game because we both love it so much. So hopefully it would be super sweet if I could pick up Silent Hill 2, the remake, before we record the next episode. Kind of just depends. But look forward to hearing us go through the rest of this. I'm having a great time. I really like this game a lot, if you couldn't tell. And I'm Dustin, I want to thank you, because I don't think I would have played this, at least not right now, had you not suggested, hey, let's do this on the show.
Yeah, man, no, I am glad I had a reason to replay it, because I've always liked the game, but now I love it, now that I've played it again. So yeah, a lot of fun, enjoyed talking about it, and looking forward to talking about the rest of it.
As am I. Well, for today, we're going to cap it. Listeners, if you want to finish playing the game so you can hang with the rest of the discussion, please do. If you want to discuss what we talked about today, jump into the Discord server. Again, it is free, and you can talk all about this game, upcoming games, past games, whatever you'd like. You don't even have to talk about games at all if you don't want to. There's no requirements. So, once again, thank you, Dustin, for joining me. Thank you, listeners, for sticking around. And until next time, I am Rick, as always, forever, not just next time, for all time. I am Rick. We're signing off for now. Take care.